Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. At AM 630.
837 on WMAL. Brian Wilson, Larry O'Connor on the line. Our good friend Eli Lake, the national security reporter for the Daily Beast. He's on with us now. Been doing some great reporting about the whole Benghazi thing. And it was, I guess, about this time on Friday that David Petraeus was wrapping up his testimony behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, Eli. And so here's where we are on this thing, if I've got it right. David Petraeus says, here are the talking points that we started with at the CIA, and over here are the talking points that Susan Rice got before she went on nationwide TV and started talking about how it all was tied to the video. And early on, we were talking about terrorists, and we were talking about an attack, an organized attack, but later on, by the time those talking points got to Susan Rice, that had been changed. Who changed them? David Petraeus said it wasn't CIA. Over at the Pentagon, they say it wasn't the Pentagon. State Department says it wasn't the State Department. And the White House came out this week and said, we changed one word, had no real effect over the talking points. So what happened here?
Well, I mean, I have been on the story about how people thought within 24 hours it was a terrorist attack, and then there was that 10-day period where they made it seem like they didn't quite know what it was, that it was a spontaneous protest. And I think I think more and more what we're seeing is that the actual talking points that were provided to Susan Rice, and provided not just to Susan Rice, to Jay Carney, to other spokesmen who deal with the media in those 10 days, really downplayed and made it seem like this was not something that was a kind of planned attack. A flash mob with guns is a phrase that we've heard. And it's unclear the level of planning that did, in fact, go into it, because certainly the level of planning is not the same as a 9/11 or the 1998 embassy attack, or what we would traditionally associate with kind of an al-Qaeda plotted attack over several months, moving lots of people, lots of money over several countries. That's probably not what happened, but certainly it was not a protest that got out of hand. And the impression that was given in those talking points that it was this protest that was out of hand, I can't give you the motivations as to why that happened, but it's very suspicious that during an election year where only a few weeks before the president claimed that, General Motors is alive and Al-Qaeda is dead and Bin Laden is dead.
Well, there was also something else going on. Remember at that time, Eli, and I'm wondering if this is not what it is. Remember when there was that protest in Cairo, and Mitt Romney put out a criticism of the fact that the embassy in Cairo seemed to be making rather apologetic statements, without anybody's authorization. When he criticized that, the whole campaign just came down on him. The Obama campaign came down on Romney for playing politics. And that was the narrative going into that weekend. And they wanted that narrative to continue because it was actually something that was not going very well for the Romney campaign. And I'm wondering if that was indeed the motivation. And if that's the case, one has to wonder if it wasn't somebody like David Axelrod who edited those talking points.
Well, that would be speculation on my part. I don't know.
It's speculation on my part, but it's at least as good a theory as anything I've heard.
Or maybe it was John Brennan, who is in the White House and has a role in the intelligence community in terms of drafting things that would be going out in terms of both talking points and things that would remain classified.
Yeah.
One thing I can say is I think this all points to the fact that, well, oftentimes we talk about this issue of classified information as only from the perspective of how it needs to be protected and can't be leaked, and operations will be made, will be foiled if things get out. And there is a lot of truth to that. As a reporter, as much as I want to try to get information out, there is, of course, times when information gets out that really does have a negative effect. But there's also a negative effect, I think, when you have excessive secrecy. The information that policymakers had on the classified side was that there was a member of Ansar al-Sharia, or one of these attackers, who was talking to a member of Al-Qaeda's affiliate. I think I was the first to report that. That information suggests it's an act of terrorism conducted by known terrorist groups. The information that was shared in those first 10 days was that it was a protest that had gotten out of hand. The American people would have been more informed if there was I guess, more of a connection between what was being known on the classified side and what was being said in public.
Yeah, and maybe the intention was not to truly inform the American public at that time. Hey Eli, let's shift to Israel right now in Gaza. Unbelievable images over the weekend of a major escalation. What are you hearing where it stands right now, and what is the administration doing in terms of supporting Israel or just trying to stay out of it and be neutral?
Well, I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu wants to get into a ground invasion at this point. And if he does get into a ground invasion, I think that they want to have it in such a way that it's more similar to an Operation Defensive Shield, where people were able to go, where IDF forces were able to sort of do a very pinpointed incursion and come right back out. And not a situation where you have troops on the ground for something like 3 weeks like you did with Operation Cast Lead at the end of 2008. And the very beginning of 2009, right before Obama took the oath of office. I think the IDF would like to have something more substantive on the ground, and there is a political fight between Netanyahu and his military. And the issue here is the very limited goal of, I think, rolling up the entire rocket infrastructure for Gaza that is largely controlled by Hamas. And that is the end game, and much of this depends now, I think, on the diplomatic efforts of President Erdogan in Turkey and President Morsi in Egypt, who have connections and influence over Hamas. All three entities, Morsi, Hamas, and Erdogan, are all versions of the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is going to be very much not just another round of the Arab-Israeli conflict. This is also the first test of Islamism in the new kind of new Arab Spring reality, where you have another major government in Egypt that is a Muslim Brotherhood government, and whether or not Hamas feels that this momentum will give it kind of emboldenment at this point, that's a huge factor as well that I think is being tested in this latest war.
And how is that going to be resolved? I mean, the Obama administration seems to be saying that, everybody needs to walk away, but they don't. Are they doing anything behind the scenes to sort of, help this thing devolve instead of ramp up?
I think it's absolutely, that's my impression. They're on the phone with all these leaders, and I think that, the conversation that I wrote about from Friday, now this is, things change very quickly.
Yes, it has.
But on Friday, the message from Netanyahu was, we are not planning a ground invasion at this point unless we see another kind of escalation. Now, that escalation may have happened over the weekend when you saw yet another rocket fired on Tel Aviv, and that's extremely serious because even though the Iron Dome has been very successful and other missile defense systems have been very successful in Israel in this current war, they're not perfect. And one stray rocket, just like terrorism, is enough to escalate this thing into, I think, a land invasion of Gaza or worse.
All right.
So the point here is it's very similar to terrorism. You only have to get lucky once. And if Hamas gets lucky once and one of those rockets goes into a heavily populated area and you see something like 20 or 10 casualties, and the Israeli television is sort of showing those images over and over again, I think the political pressure
it all changes,
unbearable.
right? Yeah. Well, listen, Eli, thank you. We always appreciate your insight. Thanks for being with us.